Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to this live BSI webinar titled CE Marking Changes and the New Gas Appliance Regulation, commonly known as the GAR. Today on the panel are Graham Mackay, Gregory Childs, and me, Robert Lee. Graham is Global Head of Gas and Electrical Products at BSI. He has worked in the field of gas product safety for over 30 years and among other things advises the European Commission on gas safety. He's a chartered engineer and is a massive football fan of a little-known team called Crystal Palace, but we won't hold that against him. Greg is the certification team manager for gas and electrical products at BSI. He has over 10 years experience working at BSI and is an active member of various IEC technical panels. And I'm here to help facilitate today's presentation as BSI UK's media production manager.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the great introduction, Rob. Appreciate that. I'll just start by giving you a quick overview of BSI for those who don't know quite as much about it as they might do. So we are the UK's national standards body. We are the only source of British standards. We're also the world's first national standards body, established in 1901, and established by a gentleman called Sir John Wolfe Barry, who designed Tower Bridge, hence the picture there. First standards published were on really simple things like screw threads and railway gauges, which is why they get featured. But obviously we've come a long way since then. We do have a specialist focus on standards creation, training and certification to do with standards. That's our main product. And we have a global network of over 70,000 clients in 150 countries worldwide. And BSI shaped some of the best known standards in the world, things like ISO 9001, ISO 14001. These are all very well known, invented and developed by BSI. And we have no shareholders. We are a Royal Charter company, and everything that we make as profit is reinvested back into our business to support our core values of standards creation, training and certification. The Kite Mark brand that we have is one of the oldest trust marks, very well known around the world. So Rob gave me a lovely introduction. I'll say very little more about myself. Just obviously you have my contact details there. There will be questions at the end. Feel free to contact us after the event if you've got more sort of personal questions about your own products that we don't address today, and Greg's details as well. So what are we going to cover today? Background to the old Gas Appliance Directive, and not because we want to bore you with history, but because actually understanding some of the weaknesses of the existing regulations are really important if you understand to understand the changes that have been made in the new regulations. They're all there for a reason. They actually are designed to address weaknesses in the current framework. Overview of the new regulations, timelines for the changes from GAD to GAR, overview of the new conformity assessment procedures that will apply under the GAR, and particularly what should diligent importers do. We gave this one very much an importers theme because we wanted to cover the new obligations on importers. We'll take questions. We've got quite a lot been sent through already, but please feel free to send more as we go, and then we'll close. So what is the issue? So we're talking about CE marking, particularly CE marking of gas appliances, of course, and fittings. This is currently regulated by the European Gas Appliances Directive, or the GAD, as I will call it in our little shorthand, and it's going to be replaced by a new piece of legislation called the Gas Appliance Regulation, or the GAR, and that will happen on the 21st of April 2018. In fact, it's already happened. It happened in 2016, but the law comes into force on the 21st of April 2018. Remember, CE marking means compliance with all relevant regulations, and we're talking about the Gas Appliance Regulations today. All of the other CE marking directives or regulations which may or may not have applied to your product are unaffected by this change. It's really important you understand this. If they applied before, they still apply today. Things like the Low Voltage Directive, the EMC Directive, construction products, pressure equipment, and so on. None of them are affected by anything we're talking about today, just the gas appliance regulations. So who's going to be impacted by this this change? Pretty much everybody in the supply chain for gas appliances and fittings, which are basically control devices to go into gas appliances within the EU. Particularly manufacturers who supply into the EU, importers who import products into the EU, distributors of products around the EU, and even retailers. So elephant in the room, which we should just talk about, it'd be daft not to, is Brexit. Of course, we are talking about European regulations, and clearly the EU is still, the UK is still planning to leave the EU. As it stands, clearly there's this talk of hard and soft Brexit, depending on the type of trade deal that the UK makes with the EU on exit. As it stands, the information we're given by government is that the UK will fully implement these regulations. In fact, they'll come into force at least a year before the UK leaves the EU anyway. So I don't believe that gas safety is something that's very high on the government's agenda to change even after Brexit. So the chances are these will stay unchanged for many, many years, if not forever. So all the advice we're giving and we're hearing is that it's going to be business as usual as far as these regulations are concerned, and the UK's relationship with the EU. And that's, I think, I'll hand over to Greg.
Okay, thanks, Graham. It's a good introduction for us all. So, hello all. I'm going to start off. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the GAR, the Gas Appliance Directive. So, 1993, the Gas Appliance Directive was published. And there was a transition period when it came in of approximately 3 years. So it came into force on the 1st of January 1996. Amongst other things, it introduced CE marking of gas equipment, mandatory independent certification for gas equipment, so you couldn't sell your product within the EU without this independent certification, and a set of essential safety requirements which apply to all gas appliances. Part of this, there was a two-stage process. So you've got the initial type testing stage where it's for physical testing of the product, evaluation, design, plus ongoing factory surveillance, so you can make sure that, you know, it's not just one being made correctly, it's all those which are coming afterwards. And we started off with approximately 15 notified bodies who were appointed to undertake this certification, this third-party certification for the safety of appliances. We fast forward now to 1996 when the GAD's now fully in force. All gas appliances marked on the market must comply with all the regulations, and it had a huge impact for some products. So a couple of examples of this: gas fires had new safety devices which had to be implemented. Big frying ranges for things like chip shops had to have overheat thermostats. There was an issue with these overheating and going up in flames and causing incidents. So if we fast forward again to sort of 2012, we've got a few figures here to show that it's pretty obvious that, well, certainly I think that the GAD had a positive impact on gas safety. So if we look back at the slides we've got a very visible downward trend. There is a bit of a spike around 2008, 2009. Most of this can be attributed to one particular product. And this was a particular cooker which had a defect which led to, it says 8 deaths, but I think it was 13, it was probably more. And this was that big spike at that point. This is that product in question. So the issue was if you shut the grill door, it was a gas grill, there was an issue with emissions, so carbon monoxide levels would rise and it killed a lot of people. It must be said that this cooker complied fully with the European standard for this, which was EN30, and it had to be revised urgently and revisited. So we've got a bit of background. We're going to talk about why there's a problem and why the EU Commission undertook the review of the Gas Appliance Directive with a view to bringing in the GAR. So there was 3 sort of issues we see in this. So the regulations as they were, these are very old regulations, 20 years ago. Things changed in that time. Standards, again, we saw an issue with the standard there which caused those problems. And notified bodies. So notified bodies now, there's around 55 compared to 15. So there could be a bit of a problem there, but we'll discuss a bit more. So if we start off on regulations, so installation. So the gas industry as a whole thinks of sort of gas as piped gas. This isn't the case, but it assumes that for piped gas, there's a competent installer, someone who knows what they're doing installing these products so they can check they're safe before people turn them on. Examples within the GAD which talk about this are: appliances only have to be safe when correctly installed and serviced according to their instructions. An essential requirement of 1.2.1 covers technical instructions intended for the installer. Now, we think these aren't really valid for mobile appliances, things like barbecues, camping stoves, things like that, which aren't going to be installed by necessarily a competent installer. They're going to be installed by the person who's bought them, the person who's camping, or the homeowner. So compliance duties in the regulations are placed on the manufacturer. The problem is with this part of it is that there's been a shift from the EU to Asia in the last 20 years for manufacturing. It's very difficult to enforce the regulations when the manufacturer's outside the EU, because the regulatory bodies in the EU can't really get access to these manufacturers. And there's a particular problem where we see that production surveillance is not being performed. So the GAD is a two-stage process. You've got the type test, as I say, and then you've got the surveillance aspect, which is the ongoing production, making sure that's producing safe appliances. So the law requires that these annual activities take place, and it's still relevant for batch produced or seasonal produced product. So this is a typical process flow for the Gas Appliance Directive. So you've got your initial type test to start with. You've got followed up with initial factory inspection to make sure everything's in place for mass production of these products. It's a one-off process at this point, so you're only doing it once. You're then going into an ongoing annual safety. So there could be product audit tests, there could be factory surveillance with the QMS, and all these things. It tends to be focused on, has the product changed, rather than has the world changed, has the standards changed. So what happens when standards change? It's the big question which comes out of the GAD. We'll discuss this again a bit later on. So regulation also brings in something called state of the art. So standards are not mandatory. So there's a little driver to modify any products when standards do change. So there could be a couple of examples: flame supervision on gas cooker hob burners, pierceable LPG cartridges on camping stoves, really dangerous things. If your product's certified to a standard which allowed these at the time, there's no actual driver to change that at the moment in the law. And there's a bit of a sort of perception that if it was safe back then, it must still be safe now. I disagree with that, and we'll go into that a bit more later. So at this point, I'm going to hand back to Graham, who's going to talk a bit more about the problems, particularly on standards. So,
thank you, Greg. Yeah. So the second of our three themes of problems, we talked about the regulations themselves have some weaknesses. The second theme is the standards that underpin the regulations and are very used to demonstrate compliance with the regulations. And I'm being quite clear about this. This is weak standards, and the industry doesn't do enough. Standards are not mandatory, but they're still very, very important for defining what we see as a safe product and what we expect as a safe product. So they have a very important place in society. They are, but we all do it. I'm sure many of the people who've dialed in today are involved in standards. The process is reliant upon committees of volunteers giving up their time to go and support the process. It's hard. We've all got day jobs. Everybody's busy. There tends to be a lot of self-interest. So the companies that do send a lot of people forward clearly are doing that to forward their commercial interests as well. So that tends to dominate. Certain companies can actually dominate committees to get their own way. There's actually a lot of, it's very, very commercially attractive to maintain the status quo. Not changing a standard could save companies a lot of money. The good example of the gas cooker that Greg talked about earlier, when we proposed an amendment to EN 30 to get rid of this problem, surprising how many countries voted against it, because that would have meant they would have had to go back and test products and make sure they didn't have this problem, which would have cost them money. They didn't want to do it. Diminishing local expertise. We've talked about the shift of manufacturing from Europe to Asia. That's a thing, and in certain areas, particularly in the camping stoves, the barbecues, it's actually quite hard to find people who've got the expertise to support the standards making process. So they've tended to get weaker there. And I think the process is probably a little bit too complex, with now 30 plus countries taking part. And that's led to a lot of cop-outs, a lot of weaknesses in standards that have particularly become apparent in the mobile products world. So over-reliance on warnings rather than design solutions, poorly thought out instructions, things like no allowance for lay people assembling the products, too much jargon installed in accordance with the rules in force becomes a thing that everybody puts in their instructions without really thinking about what it means for the people who are receiving this product and actually having to install it. Too much detail in installation standards rather than actually explaining what goes on in the product. And most importantly, where most of the incidents have come from is not covering the reasonably foreseeable use of products. And we have some examples of that. This is a classic product. It's been withdrawn in large numbers throughout Europe, particularly the Netherlands have done a lot of work to improve the safety of these products. And this is people using the pan supports in the wrong place, using too big a griddle plate, using a pan that's bigger than the manufacturer recommended. And the standard EN 521 has actually been formally found to be defective for these products, and many products have been withdrawn from the market as a result of it, and not just in Europe either, in Australia as well. Patio heaters used indoors. This is an example. 3 people died in a house in Coventry some years back because they decided they needed to heat their bedroom using one of these patio heaters. Clearly foreseeable. The standard didn't then, and still hasn't, included any sort of test or measure as to whether that is foreseeable or reasonable. Should we improve the products to stop this sort of accident taking place? And maybe there's something we can learn from the electrical world. So I'll give a great example of an electric space heater, which is pretty well known. And the standard includes all sorts of safety tests, covering with material, placing close to a wall, knocking it over, blocking the air inlets, all types of things. But the gas equivalent, it does exactly the same job except through a bottle of LPG rather than a 3-pin plug. Doesn't include any of them. And that's been the case forever. And every time the subject comes up, the industry resists new tests because actually it's commercially attractive to keep it where it is. That doesn't actually benefit consumers, and it doesn't benefit safety. And what we see is monotonous regularity with consumer and product recalls of this type of product. Third problem with the old regulation is the notified bodies themselves, I'm afraid. There are now 55 plus under the GAD. And there's no doubt that the competition between notified bodies has brought great benefits to the industry in reducing the cost and time to market of products. So that's great. But I think what I see today, it's really just a race to the bottom. Everybody's cutting prices. The expertise is diminishing. And the issue for me is that the normal sort of economic quality triangle that we're all used to dealing with doesn't apply to in this space, because typically the manufacturers who may be in the Far East, for example, they don't actually care about the quality of what they buy. They're only focusing on the cost to them and the time it takes for them to get their certificate. They're not actually having to carry the cost of low quality. That's someone else carries that, an importer or societies in general, and that actually makes the whole economic argument a little bit fake for me. And here's an example of what competition actually looks like in this space. This is a product that was withdrawn from the market because of a number of incidents. We, notified body number 1, that's us actually, we're asked to assess this product. So we look at it in the context of EN 521, which is the closest standard, but it's got some new risks. It's got this tilty adjustable burner thing, which needs some sort of test. So we propose some sort of life test on that to make sure that the product can actually withstand the operations that it would be expected to get in its life. Manufacturer also asks notified body number 2 the same question. Well, their view is slightly different. They say we should test it to EN521, and there's nothing more needed. The standard doesn't include a life test for the new feature, so no extra test is needed. Clearly, commercially, they're in a much better place to win the business, but of course, the actual movement is what led to the recall. So the products. The constant movement actually causes the gas pipe inside to fracture, creating gas leaks and fires, and there are a number of incidents with the products which were then withdrawn. So notified bodies are not actually doing their job very well. They've become box tickers against standards rather than people that can actually evaluate the safety of products that are put in front of them. So finishing off the history piece, fast forwarding to 2012, the Commission, I think, recognises that the GAD does have some operational issues. How can a fully certified, a fully compliant gas cooker kill so many people? How can we improve the weak standards that we're developing? How can we make them better? How can we improve the products when we do change our standards? People are resisting the changes when they do take place. And how do we improve notified body competence? Most of the answers are actually in this document, and I think if you get the links at the end, you can actually, this document, which is the European Commission's report into the functioning of the GAD, is well worth a read. It's quite extensive. It's got a lot of market information. It's got a lot of survey information. It's actually a decent read. Out of that report came what we're talking about today, the GAR, which was published in March 2016. It's a regulation, not a directive, so it doesn't require any more national laws. The regulation will apply throughout the EU once it comes into force on 21st of April. Products have to comply with the current legislation, that's the GAD, and the national legislation up till the 20th of April. And then everything supplied after the 21st of April has to comply with the new regulation. Anything that's already been placed on the market, and that includes products in the supply chain. So if you manufactured a product in March 2018 and it was in a warehouse waiting to be supplied on, that can still be supplied on because at the time it was first placed on the market, it complied with the regulation in force at the time. And after the 21st of April, at some point, the GAD and particularly the UK regulations will be repealed. At that point, I will hand you back to Greg to talk over the changes in a bit more detail.
Thanks, Graham. So as this slide says, there's change ahead. Every time I speak about this, I do impress the point that 21st of April 2018, it really isn't far away. It's less than 10 months now, so keep that in mind. Don't think we need to do this later because there's going to be a lot of work for everyone to do, a lot of work for manufacturers, a lot of work for notified bodies. So if you leave this to the last minute, there is a danger that you'll run out of time. I just like to impress that so everyone knows. So if we go back to the subject, so as part of the new GAR, there was a number of scope changes which were brought in. So cooking was now defined better in the GAR. It brings in things such as chef's blowtorches. Most of the other things remain the same. These are the sort of things it does. Burning is better defined as what it was. It's not just the traditional sort of burning with a flame these days. It could bring in things like hydrogen fuel cells and that sort of technology. And washing is better defined. So there was a view in the old GAD that washing didn't necessarily include things like drying. Washing means washing. So this is now better defined as the whole laundry process. So it will bring, it definitely clarifies things like dryers and presses and things like that are within the scope. Air conditioning is now included where it wasn't before. Fittings no longer need to be separately marketed, so I'm going to talk about that a bit more because I got a question about this before. This is potentially where you manufacture a fitting, a valve or something like that for one specific appliance. It didn't necessarily need to be approved under the GAD. This is now removed, so any fitting needs to be certified under the new regulation. There was always an exclusion in the old directive for boilers and things like that with water temperatures greater than 105 degrees. So that now brings in things like high temperature boilers, steam boilers and things like that which were excluded before. The thinking before that these risks on these products would be covered by the Pressure Equipment Directive, but in reality, because of the size of the products, they would fall into something called sound engineering practice, so there wasn't actually any need for third-party intervention. So there's also big changes on duties for all economic operators. So manufacturers is now better defined. This is a sort of typical barbecue, not picking on John Lewis, but this is one which has been own branded by John Lewis. The regulation now states that if you own brand a product, you are defined as the manufacturer. You then have that responsibility to make sure all the conformity assessment procedures are dealt with. This again goes some way to target the issue of manufacturing of these sort of products being out in the Far East and the manufacture of them not necessarily being available. It defines better for importers as well, so we'll go into this again in a bit more detail, but importers, distributors, all these sort of people who are bringing these products into the EU, their responsibilities are now better defined. So importers, so 80% of the gas appliances which were found to be unsafe were made outside the EU. It's obviously a huge amount of the whole total. It's a growing problem as a shift in manufacturing to outside the EU with globalization, etc. And it's hard to take action against a non-EU manufacturer under the GAD. Importers now have to cooperate with the authorities to take more responsibility and ensure that the GAR process has been followed, appliances are compliant and safe, the instructions for appliances are adequate. We've all seen sort of instructions which have come from, say, China, where they're in a strange sort of written English and they don't make a lot of sense. Complaints against appliances are investigated and action is taken to ensure that they're safe. There's a new requirement under the GAR on validity period. So the new regulation brings in a maximum certificate validity period of 10 years. There was previously no sort of maximum period, so this now keeps the approval of that particular appliance to a maximum of 10 years. During this 10-year period, you can still make modifications to products as manufacturers currently do, but at the end of this period, the manufacturer has to apply to the notified body again for an extension or a new type examination certificate with a new expiry of 10 years or whatever. This is just to ensure that 10 years is a long time, things might change, there could be small changes which people don't think matter. This is just to make sure that after that 10 years, this product is still safe. Gas quality information. So this is a requirement on the different EU member states and the different EU governments, and they have to provide much more detail on the gas quality and supply pressures used in their territory. So this has always been a little bit of a hidden barrier to trade and under the GAD. Countries like Poland have lots of different areas, lots of different gas types, and these haven't been, very well known. So it's really hard for manufacturers to design and develop their appliances. This information is similar to the UK gas management regulations. The UK has been particularly good at providing this information over the years. It might become more complex. You've got sort of biomass plants, which could be on a small scale. We don't really know what this information will look like yet, but it'll all come out in due course. And again, do we need to list every landfill site or local biogas site in region? It's an unknown at the moment, and I think we'll have to wait and see what comes out. So we talked about notified bodies needed to have greater competence. So there's significant changes to the notified bodies rules brought in. Requirements for appointment of notified bodies has changed to ensure that they're competent across the whole of the EU to carry out the work they're appointed for. We've already seen some of the 50 plus notified bodies resign or not take up the offer to try and get notified under the GAR. This is very much because they don't have the competence to actually meet the new requirements. And I'm just going to say, because we've already been appointed under the GAR, and we're only one of 3 in Europe at the moment who are. So the sort of key changes to this, these are taken directly from the text. So notified bodies shall have the requisite technical competence in the specific field and must have sufficient and appropriate experience to perform the conformity assessment procedures. It's looking at all the competence of the people. Again, on a similar note, the next one is talking about sound technical and vocational training, appropriate knowledge, understanding of the requirements. This is again looking to sort of change that process where there are notified bodies who don't necessarily have this competence. And they shall participate in activities and groups to ensure proper cooperation and coordination. Very often we go to meetings, you might get around 10 notified bodies out of the 55 who actually turn up to these meetings to discuss and improve. So this is now a new requirement under the GAR that if you want to be a notified body, you have to participate in these groups. The essential requirements. So there's that list of essential requirements which you have to comply with to meet the GAR. These are health and safety requirements. So generally these are only minor changes, but there are a few new important requirements for manufacturers which could have some impact. So they have to take into account the state of the art. I mean, we'll come on to the state of art again in a bit, but you talk to the EU Commission and everyone knows what the state of the art is, but from what we're seeing, it's quite a complex subject, but we'll come on to that in a bit. Manufacturers must perform a risk assessment for all products placed on the market, and this must also consider the foreseeable misuse. So if we go back to sort of Graham's part where he was talking about the patio heater, which was used as a space heater in a house, this has happened. This is an incident. This is something which is foreseeable misuse and has to be taken into account when designing and manufacturing these products. As part of this, the manufacturer has to implement a hazard risk reduction technique. So you've got remove, guard, and warn in that order. So you want to remove the hazard, guard against the hazard, and warn against the hazard if you can't do the first two. But the best thing to do, and the thing you have to do first, is remove the hazard where you can. The intention of these requirements is that they'll help deal with the weak standards that we were talking about earlier. So if a standard, for example, that cooker where the grill door was closed and it caused deaths, part of risk assessment, we would think that manufacturer might think, well, what will happen if we close the grill door? They could perform a test to see, or they could put something in to guard against it. It doesn't necessarily always have to be very difficult or cost a lot of money. The particular solution in that situation was that there was about an inch of the door seal cut out of it to allow airflow to be better. So it's not always expensive, it's not always going to be prohibitive. So we're going to take a quick break and do a few questions. We've got a number which we were given before as well, so I'm going to hand over to Rob, who's going to ask us the questions.
Okay, thanks a lot, Greg. Like you said, we've got a few questions which have come in, and one of them is, and I think this one will probably direct to Graham, does this apply to outdoor appliances?
And yes, it does, as long as the outdoor appliances are being used for one of the specified activities which are listed within the GAR scope. So that will be something like it's cooking, space heating, lighting, but there's no indoor-outdoor slant particularly. Okay,
thanks a lot, Graham. The next one is probably for Greg, which is who will be the policeman of the industry?
This is a difficult question. It will vary from country to country. So in the UK, it's going to be typically local trading standards bodies. Or it could be the HSE for commercial products, but again, this could differ in different countries. It's likely to be the market enforcement bodies in those particular countries.
Thanks, Greg. Another one is there guidance or a list within the regulations outlining what constitutes foreseeable misuse? I'm going to ask Graham about this one.
We cover this in a minute actually and talk about some examples of what we think is foreseeable use, but there's no official status on that. This is for the manufacturer to use their own knowledge and their own thinking about.
Okay, thanks a lot, Graham. Next one is there a template for risk analysis available? Greg, is there such a thing?
So we're going to talk a bit more about risk analysis. We touched on it before about the manufacturer is required to do a risk assessment. The answer is no. Every manufacturer is free to use any style of risk assessment, risk analysis tool that they feel comfortable with. It's a difficult topic. It's causing a lot of angst. And we'll have a few examples later on in the presentation which can hopefully help.
Another one we have is, and probably for Greg, how do we control certified products manufactured as spares after the GAR is in force? Greg?
This was actually a bit of a favourite topic of ours. So spares are actually excluded from the scope of the GAR, so they don't need to be certified. However, there's various general safety regulations which will require them to be safe. So manufacturers should still follow some good design practice, maybe undertake testing to standards to make sure that they are safe when somebody installs them into the end product. So there is generally a requirement that products will be safe, but it won't necessarily fall under the GAR, it fall under the local safety and installation regulations.
Okay, thanks, Greg. We've got another one here which says, does the regulation affect the current flexible gas hose?
Okay, no. Flexible hoses are considered to be installation components, and as such they don't fall within the scope of GAR. There is an exception that if the hose was supplied factory fitted as part of a gas appliance, or was being used within a gas appliance perhaps to interconnect different parts, then it could well be considered to be a fitting and would need to have type examination and surveillance under the GAR. But the general case is no, they're excluded from the regs.
Okay, thank you. And we've got one here which is about testing, and that is what will the testing involve, and the cost, and what will the penalties be?
Yeah, so again, it's another interesting question. The detail of testing that would be needed under the GAR would depend on the specific products and the standards which apply to it. The testing can be performed by any lab which is acceptable to the notified body dealing with the application. BSI conducts testing in its own labs, in client labs or labs of a partner organisation around the world. So the intent is that we have a range of options available to give a maximum choice and flexibility for the client. Again, we'll come into a bit more, but a lot of it depends on state of the art of what testing will be required. If you've got a product now which is pretty much up to date, it follows latest harmonised standards, then there's going to be little needed in terms of testing. But again, we'll cover that in a little bit.
Okay, great. I think maybe what we'll do, we'll go back into the presentations, and Graham, I'll transfer over to you.
Excellent. Thanks, Rob. So Greg's been through the we've been through the history. We've been through the actual overview of the GAR, and the key change now is the the new changes to the essential requirements. These are the ones that we think people most want to and need to learn about. So the new requirements, Essential Requirement 1.2, effectively says the manufacturer is under an obligation to analyse the risks, identify those that apply to his appliance or fitting, and then, importantly, actually take action. You have to design and construct it, taking into account the risk analysis. So if you find, you have to find any concerns, any faults, and then you have to fix them as well. It applies in addition to any compliance with standards. Clearly, testing to a standard might be part of the solution. It could be that a particular test in a standard is the answer to your risk assessment, but complying with standards is not itself enough to comply with the risk assessment requirement. And notified bodies don't actually have any role here. The notified body can't do this for you. The manufacturer has to do this. What the reasonable notified body will need to do is actually sit with you and check that the manufacturer has done a reasonable job here and has covered the risks that you would expect to be covered. Second requirement, Greg touched on this before, is the remove, guard, warn risk reduction technique. It effectively says that things have to be done in this order. First you have to eliminate the risk. Secondly, if that can't be done, you have to take protection measures, some sort of guarding, and only then do you inform users of residual risks using warning or instructions or markings. And that's a clear steer that when you go back to things like the table cookers, simply saying, do not use this, or this must be used on a flat level surface is not good enough. You have to take into account that actually people probably will use it on a different surface. How do you actually guard them against that? Just providing the warning is no longer enough. And you have to consider unintended use of the product, the reasonably foreseeable uses. We've talked about the patio heater being used indoors. We've talked about people using cookers with bigger pans than were expected. We've talked about people closing grill doors. All of these things are reasonably foreseeable. And the Commission's been forced to act because standards and manufacturers have not been challenging themselves enough on this point, I think. So generally, risk management process is a fairly standard process, identifying the risks, think about who can be harmed and how, think about everybody involved with the product. So it could be installers, it could be service people, it could be the users. Evaluate those risks, try and quantify the risks. Obviously record your findings. You can't be diligent if you don't write down your risk assessment. And then finally, monitor and review. So we say it should be documented. You need to show due diligence to the authorities. You have to. You can't demonstrate this unless you document it. And your notified body will need to review it with you, so they'll need to see it as well. You can use any model you're comfortable with. The regulation doesn't say how you should record your risk assessment, and we've been working with a number of clients already since this started, and we're seeing a wide range of techniques that people are using, and that's great. You should use the model that you like to use and makes sense for you. My personal favorite is a fairly simple 9-box grid where you think about the probability of an incident on this axis, and you think about the impact of the incident on this axis. That allows you to focus on, on the high risk items where you really need to look at design solutions and only use warnings for the very low probability or the very low risk items. So what risks to consider? That's a standard question. Everybody wants to know that. Well, there's no black and white answer here. I can only give you my opinion. Things that I would consider, obviously, assembly and production errors. I've been involved in many product recalls and product safety issues, and a surprising number of these relate to products that have actually been manufactured wrong in the first place. They've got the wrong software, they've been given the wrong parts, so they actually left the factory unsafe. Then you've got installation errors, people actually putting them together wrong or putting them in the wrong place, that type of thing. Component faults, thermostats fail, devices fail, and they affect the safety of our products, and they're all understandable. And then finally, of course, you've got the big ticket item, which is foreseeable use, which is the user or operator error, using them in a way that you didn't expect, or maybe you did expect, but you didn't want them to use it. So taking those each one at a time, assembly and production errors, typically that's checked by quality systems. So most of the clients that we work with have got an ISO 9000 management system, which defines their processes. And generally that's going to be enough as long as you've got the right tests and the right measures in place at stages of the production process. And is that plan actually varied on a product by product basis? Because it might be okay for product X, but for product Y, you might miss something. So you need to have a sort of a quality plan for each product to make sure you're capturing everything. And then the installation errors. People who install gas appliances are human beings. They're required to be competent, but even competent people make reasonable mistakes, and designs need to be tolerant of that. There's no point giving somebody an instruction to set the CO2 in the flue to 9.36%, and then if it happens to be 9.4%, a tiny deviation, the appliance becomes unsafe. You've got to allow reasonable tolerances on things. Make sure the instructions are clear as well, particularly thinking about other countries. If you're exporting, we might be used to countries where we've got a highly skilled gas installer force, Germany and the UK, for example. But other countries don't have that, and they get installed by people who are basically just plumbers, and things need to be a little bit clearer, perhaps. And then thinking about our leisure products again, there is no competent installer. These are bought and installed by lay people. So instructions need to be much clearer and designs need to be much more foolproof to protect people from their own mistakes. There's no point putting a lot of jargon and standard speak about installing the rules in accordance with the rules in force, because the person who buys a gas barbecue is not going to know what the rules in force are. You need to explain that much more clearly. Finally, component faults, component faults are the next one. Many component faults, things like thermostat failures, electronic control system failures, are already covered by our standards, but there are potentials for other faults that standards don't cover, and it is worth some sort of FMEA to look at what's the impact of a particular component failing. One event I was involved in some years ago concerned a boiler which had an independent control thermostat and an independent overheat thermostat, which the standard required, but they were actually held on by a single screw, and it was the screw that failed, and both thermostats then failed at the same time, leading to the product becoming unsafe. And where I'm seeing people are getting a little bit weaker is on new technology. We're racing ahead with new technology. Hardly a day that goes by where there's not a new iPhone or something on the market, or a new app for something. And we need to recognise that our standards don't cover this stuff. It takes years and years for standards to adapt to technology. And by the time the standards adapted for the latest type of iPhone, for example, it's probably obsolete anyway. And it is a thing that new technology does generally introduce new risks. This is an example from our history, where we used to have lots of gas fires with mechanical controls, and the safety was very well understood. The standards were very long established, and the product was, broadly speaking, as safe as it was going to be. And along came somebody and thought, well, a great idea, we'll add remote controls to it, because what's not to like? You get up, who wants to get off their sofa and turn their fire up? It's great. But of course, we as a notified body got asked to look at this, and we asked the question, well, there must be some new risks. What new risks have been added? And you can see, suddenly the product that was impossible for toddlers to operate can now be operated by very, very small children. The cat can switch your fire on. It couldn't before. Control system faults could cause your fire to come on unexpectedly. Other devices can interfere with your fire and cause it to come on. All of these things, have a real potential risk of harm, of burns and fire and such like. So we've introduced a lovely new feature, but a lot of new risk which has to be managed. And in this case, actually, it ended really badly because the manufacturer didn't think of these risks, and there was an incident involving a child's toy which caused the fire to come on, and a very, very costly recall. Luckily, nobody was injured, but a very, very costly product recall ensued, which could have been avoided had they thought through the risks in the first place. The final part of the risk assessment requirement is about user behaviour. Again, it's that foreseeable use. You have to consider the manner that the user uses the product. It's no longer acceptable just to put in the instructions, you must leave the door open. You have to consider, well, what if they close it? Reasonably foreseeable doesn't mean the wackiest thing that you can think of, because obviously everything is foreseeable if you speak about it and worrying about it. What we're saying is it's got to be reasonable and it's got to be foreseeable. So keep it real. Don't try and look at what other people are doing. Don't make it too much of a burden on yourself that you're solving every crazy problem that you could possibly envisage on a sleepless night. Are the instructions reasonable for the product? That's always a good place. Everything that you say shouldn't be done, you've now got to think about, well, what if people do it? Is it reasonable for them to do it? And if so, we probably have to protect them. And design solutions are needed. Not more warnings, not more stickers, not more instructions. These things need design solutions to protect users from their own mistakes. So, good example. We take our favourite cooker here. Clearly the intended use is for cooking. Reasonably foreseeable use is possibly space heating. People do use cookers to warm their kitchens up sometimes. Other types of things you might think about with cookers would be the size of pans. Many instructions say you can only use a particular size of pan. Well, what happens if somebody uses a bigger pan? I checked my own cooker when I was writing an article about this, and I found that the frying pan that I've been using for many years was significantly bigger than the maximum pan that I'm allowed to use on my cooker, apparently, but I still use it. Great example, little gas barbecue. Clearly the intended use is for outdoors. Anyone who's ever been camping in the UK knows that that's not always possible or desirable. So it is reasonably foreseeable that some degree of indoor use will be used, and that will need some sort of assessment as to how can we make that as safe as possible. It may not be completely solvable, but there may be better warnings, maybe clearer warnings, maybe safety devices are feasible.
Go back to the risk reduction techniques again. I mean, we've covered this earlier, but again, eliminate the risks as far as possible. protect against the risk if it can't be eliminated, and as a final option, inform users. It can't be a cop-out to say that there's just a warning saying don't do this if there's a way to eliminate it and protect against it, and it's reasonably easy to do. So just take that into account. So just a little cartoon of it. It hasn't got time to read the safety rules. So an example of risk reduction. So here we've got a gas cooker. It's got a glass lid. Examples, this is sort of backwards, but you could warn against the product. You could shut the lid, have a warning label which says don't close the lid. For us, as a notified body, this wouldn't be acceptable, and we wouldn't actually certify a product like this because there are ways to protect against this. You could have a cut-off device as a safety solution, so it cuts the gas off if you close the lid. Or you could use shatterproof glass, which effectively means if you did close the lid, the glass couldn't shatter into big shards, which could damage people. Okay, so if we move on to the essential requirement for state-of-the-art. So this one states, I'm going to go for it, the essential requirements are to be interpreted and applied in such a way as to take account of the state-of-the-art and current practice at the time of design and manufacture, as well as the technical and economic considerations which are consistent with a high degree of energy efficiency, of health and safety protection. So it's a bit of a mouthful. The EU Commission think everyone understands what state-of-the-art means. Again, it's a tricky subject. So key for this one is monitor and review. So for us, state-of-the-art generally means compliance with the latest harmonised standards. It doesn't always mean that because standards aren't mandatory. But generally, if you're complying with the latest harmonised standards, reviewing that this still applies on an ongoing basis, you should be in compliance with this essential requirement. Again, the world is a changing place, so technology is changing, and it will change how it applies to your product. Again, I said earlier on, there's a lot of people who think it was safe when it was first certified 20 years ago. It means it's safe now. I really disagree with that. The standards change to keep up with this technological advance, and the requirements change over time. So we need to keep our products reasonably up to date with these standards and this current thinking in matters of safety and energy efficiency. So manufacturers and notified bodies have an obligation under the GAR to make sure they're aware of the changes to the generally acknowledged state of the art and whether the changes require further investigation. Again, in practice, this generally means keeping up to changes with standards. You don't have to use standards, but people write these standards. They're an industry consensus. They're generally at the forefront of this. The manufacturers should evaluate the changes to standards and whether their products need to be updated to meet these new standards. And certificates can be withdrawn if products aren't updated in a reasonable time. Obviously, if there's a safety issue come from a new piece of technology which has come out, these things need to be updated so it doesn't cause a problem. And the state of the art keeps changing. This is one of the issues. So we had Graham's gas fire earlier. A child's toy could have turned this on. Now we've got things like mobile phones. And these devices have got Bluetooth, they've got Wi-Fi, they've got all sorts of radio signals and things being sent out by them. It's now at another level than just an infrared child's toy. So again, over time, these things keep changing. It's rapidly expanding, advancing. So we've got new risks here, obviously the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and things. So this is sort of a new process flow for the GAR. So we showed the one earlier for the GAD. It's effectively the same, otherwise there is a new step in. So previously, if you didn't make changes to your products, you probably didn't need to update them to the latest standards. If state-of-the-art changes now, there is now an obligation that this is assessed and this is reviewed, and if necessary, products are updated to meet these requirements. It's a big change, and it's going to bring in big changes for safety and improve safety going forwards. So we're going to talk a little bit about duties of importers. There's no doubt a few importers on the webinar today, so it might be of interest to them. So Article 9 of the new regulation brings in the obligations for importers. I'm going to highlight a few words in red because they're very key. So an importer can only place compliant products on the market, and they have a requirement to ensure correct conformity assessment procedures have been performed by the manufacturer of those products. The word ensure there means that something's got to be done. Somebody's got to do something, make sure it's proper and good and proper. They need to mark their name or trademark on the packaging, so enforcement bodies know who to contact. They need to ensure the instructions for the products are supplied so they can be used correctly. They need to ensure that storage and transportation of the product does not affect its safety. If it's deemed necessary, you might have to carry out some sample testing. And if there are any doubts, an importer should take action to ensure the safety of those products that they are placing onto the market. And they also have to keep the records for 10 years. So if any market enforcement bodies, trading standards or anyone like that want to get in contact and look for these files, they have to be there and available. And again, if they do, then you need to provide the evidence. Just a bit of self marketing here. We have a white paper which has been written for importers. It's available in the handouts. So on the right hand side of your screen, you should be able to see the different handouts. There's 4 and this is one of them. So there's more detail on this written out and you can take them away today. So really the key to this is getting the right evidence. So it's really about the quality of the documentation, not the quantity. So it's quite often we've sat in a room and an importer has come along and they'll go, look, we've got this huge stack of documentation. And we sit there and we start to go through it and we go, that one's old, that one's just nonsense, that one's not even for this product, that one's something else completely. And they're not necessarily looking at the quality and if it's the right documentation. So we've listed effectively the 5 main things that you need to look for. You need to look for the manufacturer's declaration of conformity, the GAR type examination certificate, the surveillance certificate, evidence of conformity with any other directive. So Graham mentioned right at the start, it could be the low voltage directive, the pressure equipment directive, any of these directives which might apply as well, and the instructions. And they need to be checked. They can't just be put in a pile and go, look, we've got a big pile of stuff. They need to be looked at. So checking the document. So here's a great example. This is a declaration of conformity. This is the most important document. This is the manufacturer's statement of compliance. This is what the manufacturer is saying the CE mark means on their product. Now this particular one is from a random Chinese test lab. They obviously aren't the manufacturer. So it looks very good, but it's not right. It's the wrong sort of document. The only declaration of conformity you should be looking for and accepting is from the manufacturer. What you need to check is also that it covers the model you're buying, it covers the directives on it or regulations, it's signed by the correct person. So not that this manufacturer's like tricked the cleaner into signing it, it needs to be signed by the correct competent person. You guys are doing business with these people, so you probably know who that would be. Does it list the standards which have been applied to show conformity with the different directives? Are they the right standards? If it's dated, it might be advisable that there's some form of checklist developed to take account of these to show that you've reviewed these products and taken it into account. So the next one, there's the GAR specific documents. So these are the documents specific for the gas appliances. So there's 2 separate documents which are really needed. You've got the type examination certificate, which is the initial testing of the product to show that that one-off type sample is compliant with the requirements. And then you've got the EC surveillance certificate, which is the ongoing production conformity certificate. Both of these documents are needed under the GAR and the GAD. This hasn't changed. Again, do they cover the products you're buying? They're not similar products, but the actual products. And are the certificates themselves genuine? We see it all the time where Graham tells a story particularly where he got sent a certificate to check if it was right and he'd signed it, but it was a fake. For us, it's easy to do this. We've got a phone number you can phone up to, or there's an online system where you can check the quality, the certificates to see if they are real. Another good thing to check is, particularly for the surveillance certificate, each notified body has a notified body number attached to it. This is ours, so on a product it should say CE and the number of the surveillance body. We're 0086, there are obviously plenty of others. Just check that this lines up with the certificate to make sure it's correct. So checking the body that issued the documents could be another issue. So are the certificates actually issued by a notified body? There's lots of examples of documents which are misleading, and they aren't actually issued by proper notified bodies. So this is a good example. This is an Italian company. They're actually a notified body under the Machinery Directive, but not under the GAD, but they issue this certificate. It looks all very proper, it mentions all the right things, but because they're not a notified body, in eyes of the law, it means absolutely nothing. You would not be in compliance with the law. You can check this by looking on the European website, which is called Nando, not to be confused with the popular fast food chicken chain. And here's the sort of things to show up. So this is the list of notified bodies for the gas appliance regulation, of which at the moment there's only 3, and one BSI is one of those. It's best not to be confused. There's lots of people who are certified, notified under the GAD. There's not an automatic transition to the GAR, so it's something to check with your current notified body if you're unsure. Again, just to show this slide again, so for the gas appliance regulation, there's currently 3. There's BSI, DVGW in Germany, and a Czech company, which I can't pronounce their name, so that's how it is. So we move on to sort of instructions again. It's a real opportunity for importers to make a real difference. The importer speaks the native language, so it's going to make more sense if they review it and make changes if necessary. Legibility of these instructions is key. Font size, differentiation of warnings. You don't want something in tiny, fine print which someone can't read if they need to be aware of it. So, all sort of key things. Restrictions and warnings have to be reasonable. Assembly might be foolproof. Maybe try it yourself to make sure it is. Pictures and symbols might make them easier to follow. And avoid the tendency to overdo quantity of warnings. They've got to be the right warnings. They've got to be good. Most notified bodies simply check instructions against a list of information required by the EN standard. There's little information or little thought to presentation or the context or content of this information. So there is actually an ISO guide for the design of instruction manual. So for an importer, it might be worthwhile getting this. It says information on safety should be at the beginning. Operating instructions should include all sorts of different things to help. And the text needs to be legible. Again, easily visible, normal eyesight from distances that people might read them from. It needs to take into account things like position of user, viewing angle, light levels, etc. Moving on to storage and transport. It's not likely to be a huge issue for gas products, but there have been examples where it has caused problems. Watch for things like corrosion from shipping, long-term low temperature storage, vibration from road transport, reasonable mishandling in warehouses and transport, stacking of the products, all sorts of things. So just assess the risks with the manufacturer to make sure the storage and transport conditions are understood, to make sure these products are safe when you as the importer place them on the market. So we said sample testing where it might be required. So where deemed appropriate, importers should carry out sample testing of appliances. The onus is placed on the importer to decide. They might decide it's necessary, might decide it's unnecessary. Not all test facilities are prohibitively expensive. I mean, we've got the picture there of the burning teddy bear test, which is, I wouldn't like to go home and tell my family that's what I do as a living, but I guess there's people who do. So it's a really simple test. It could be easy to do. It could be something which could be done to show a bit of diligence. The best testing would be independent of the OEM or the notified body. They've obviously got a conflict of interest at that point if they make the product or certify the product. So an independent body could be a better option. Consider complaints and foreseeable use of products. If you've placed a product on the market, got a considerable number of complaints, it might be something you want to check into. And a good practice might be to keep a golden sample of the first one you've got, you're happy with it, you know it's safe. Just check that the batches of products you're getting in don't change. Focus on the key safety issues only. There's no huge issues for slight changes and things. And most importantly, if you suspect the product might not be safe, take action. Make sure you do something to take it off the market or put right what's wrong. So just to finish off quickly on what a CE mark is. CE mark is simply a promise of compliance from a manufacturer that the product complies with minimal legal requirements. It's nothing more. It doesn't mean compliance. This is the manufacturer's declaration. The key issue is whether you trust the person making that promise, as you might be accountable under the regulations, under the law, for that product that you're putting on the market. So it's just, you've got to do something to make sure these things are safe and proper before you place them on the market. Is the key thing there. So I'm going to hand back to Graham.
Thank you. So just starting to wrap up a little bit, we'll go through a bit of a summary and also what does this mean for you? What do you need to do to comply with the GAR in the, whatever it is, 9 months that are left before you need to comply? So there's the timelines. That's actually what happens. Literally, it is overnight. The GAR was published in March 2016. Notified bodies could be appointed from October. October this year, member states will have to provide all the gas supply data to allow people to ensure that they can safely supply products. And from the 21st of April, GAR applies and the GAD will be repealed. That's the key date. And it does literally apply overnight. So the GAD applies to products that are supplied at this point, GAR applies after that point. So clearly, people will be wise to start thinking about GAR compliance ahead of this date. And just to put in our shop, we were appointed as notified body, as Greg showed you with the Nando slide back in February, and we are now issuing GAR certificates to customers who want them. So what do you need to do? First of all, you need to think about all your current products supplied, which you plan to carry on supplying after April 18. Clearly, a lot of products that you perhaps already have certification for are going to be obsolete anyway because they're quite old. Ensure that the current products that you make and supply are compliant with the state of the art. Now, generally, that's going to mean the latest EN standards, as we talked about, where that's technically and economically feasible. There is that caveat, and engage with a notified body or BSI, ideally, if you're in any doubt what the state of the art is for your product. Complete your own risk assessment as required by the GAR, and do that sooner rather than later, because the chances are you might have to make design changes. And we all know it takes a long time to get design changes made and into production, and time is now getting quite short. And engage with us early in the process so that we can plan your work. We're already booking slots for our clients who want to make this transition from GAD to GAR, so that any required work can be done and planned in before April 18, so that you actually get certification issued and conformity of your certification. So what are we doing? So we are now offering services for compliance with the GAR already. We're delivering that today. And if you are placing a product on the market right this minute, what we plan to do is we evaluate your product against the GAR, with including the risk assessment and all the additional requirements. But then we'll also provide you with a GAD certificate, which covers you for the time between now and the 21st of April 2018, and then a GAR certificate which becomes effective on the 21st of April 18. So you get continuity of product. So a product that you want to place on the market now, you can carry on supplying through the transition next year and know that you've actually ticked all the boxes for that. We have a dedicated GAR website which has got a lot of information and a lot of the publications that we've written on issues like the key changes, risk assessment, duties of importers that you can download anyway, document that we wrote about state of the art, that type of thing, to keep people informed of and hopefully share the knowledge that we've learned with this subject. We started delivering GAR type examination this month. We've got transition plans that we've worked out with most of our major clients now, and we've got as a commercial offering, we're providing 3, 6 or 10-year validity certificates. Obviously we can't offer longer than 10 years, but because there's a cost associated with the duration of these certificates, some products clearly aren't intended to last for 10 years. So we felt there was a need to offer shorter certificates for products, like barbecues, camping stoves. They tend to churn quite quickly, and they're not going to be around for 10 years. So why should the manufacturer pay for a 10-year certificate? We can transition GAD certificates from any notified body to the GAR. There's no penalty or additional cost for doing that, and we're happy to talk to anybody who's got products they want to transition. And those of our clients who have surveillance with us, we're working on a transition assessment which will take place probably late Q3, early Q4 to cover the GAD and the GAR requirements in one visit, so that they have continuity again going forward. The intention here is to try and make April 2018 as seamless as possible for all of our customers. So, summary. The GAD has worked pretty well. We all think it's impacted on safety well. We all think gas appliances are generally safer because of the GAD. It's a solid model, type testing and surveillance. It's working much better than things like the LVDR, that's for sure. It's got some operational issues, particularly with the role of standards and with notified bodies. So the GAD will be replaced by the GAR in April 2018, and the GAR, in my opinion, addresses all the major weaknesses in the GAD. So it should actually help us move forward with safer gas appliances and fittings, and also making the right economic operators accountable for the products that are being placed on the market, ensuring that the surveillance process is always being followed around the world, and making sure that gas appliances comply with the state-of-the-art requirements as these develop and evolve over time. And now, of course, as we all know, a mandatory risk assessment to address the weaknesses that we have seen in standards and make sure that manufacturers do think about the safety of their products holistically and not just box ticking against standards that may or may not be out of date. So that's the end of the actual formal presentation. We still have a few more questions.
Thanks a lot, Graham. I'm just going to run through those questions for you guys. Now, the first one, and maybe we'll put this over to Greg, is how would it affect my company's import into the UK?
Thanks, Rob. So we've covered a bit about the duties and responsibility of importers during this presentation anyway, so hopefully that will have informed you more. But broadly, importers will have to check that the manufacturers followed the process correctly. That's it, simply. So it's having that relationship with the manufacturer to make sure it's all done correctly, because you might be held accountable if it hasn't.
Thanks a lot, Greg. Next question is, how does it affect us as service engineers? And Graham, I think we'll pass this over to you.
It almost certainly doesn't affect service engineers. It only affects people supplying gas appliances. So service engineers in their sort of classic definition will be somebody repairing or installing products. It doesn't impact on them.
Graham, do you also want to take the question about the deadlines as well? This one is about, I'm specifically interested in deadlines for each stage during the transition period.
Okay, well, there's only one deadline, and that's the 21st of April 2018. Everything else is not really a deadline, but it's maybe about making sure you leave yourself enough time to actually achieve the deadline. So clearly, if you apply on the 20th of April 2018, it's not going to happen, because you need time to do the risk assessment, make sure you've done your analysis, make sure you comply with the state of the art. So how long that takes you to do is anybody's guess. If we look at the number of certificates people had, I mean, there were some there with 20 plus certificates. That's a lot of products to do risk assessment for, make sure you've done the state of the art, potentially do a little bit more testing. If I was in your position, I'd want this done and dusted by Christmas, so I can go into the new year nice and relaxed, and I can carry on supplying product in April. I wouldn't want to be leaving it to the last minute, but everybody's different.
Thanks a lot, Graham. Another question we've had come in is, what will be reviewed by the notified body for a GAR certificate? Any QMS queries, that sort of thing. Greg, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so GAR compliance stands alone from other regulations which may or may not apply to a gas appliance or fitting. However, during the type examination process, the notified body will usually check evidence from related product regulations as they might help to satisfy GAR essential requirements. Specifically, there's requirements, compliance with the LVD for gas parts to make sure there's no safety issues without the EMC radio equipment directive. So we might look at those requirements to make sure those are covered. QMS issues are only related to the surveillance required under the GAR, so we'll cover those separately during the surveillance transition.
Okay, thank you. We've got another one here, which is we're UK importers and distributors of gas fires sold under the original manufacturer's brand. Does the GAR affect us in any way? Graham, can I put this over to you?
I mean, the key there is you are importers. So you have the responsibilities that are outlined in Article 9 of the regulations that Greg just talked about a minute ago. So we've covered it in some detail today.
Okay, another one is how often do they change the certification regulations as they're in April 2018? Greg, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so they change the regulations not very often. It's a very rare thing. So it's the first change in 25 years. So as you can see, it's a long period of time, so it might last long. The standards that we use to show compliance with regulation change more frequently. This could be 3 to 5 years as an example. It might be longer, it might be shorter.
Okay, thank you. Another one is, do the new regulations apply only to domestic items, or do they include industrial tools and appliances? Graham, do you want to take this one, please?
Yeah, no problem. So the regulations apply to appliances burning gaseous fuels used for cooking, refrigeration, air conditioning, space heating, etc., etc. It's very well defined in the regulation. That covers both domestic and commercial use, so there's no limitation there. What they don't cover is industrial processes that are used on industrial premises. So if you imagine sort of production line equipment in factories, they're not covered. And they wouldn't generally cover tools. There's not many tools I think would fall within the scope.
Okay, thanks, Graham. Another one here is, if manufacturers fail to comply with the relevant codes and regs, what reporting mechanism will apply for registering such failures? And how is that actual compliance going to be enforced? I'll put this over to Greg.
So I think we covered this question in the earlier sort of question and answer stage. It varies from country to country. I mean, in the UK, it's typically, again, local trading standards or the health and safety executive, depending on the type of product, whether it's commercial or domestic.
Okay, thanks. Another one is, what would be in the design documentation in the new regulations? Graham?
Yeah, that's actually given in quite detail in the regulations in Annex 3. There's quite a long list. I won't read it out now, it'll be really boring. But the list is available. Annex 3 under type examination gives a whole list of design documentation that the manufacturer has to provide.
Okay, well, we're going to start wrapping this up. We're going to take maybe just a handful more questions coming through, and let me see one that we've got coming here, which says, does the library of standards published under the GAR need to be reviewed to address the new essential requirements in the GAR? If so, how is that revision process going?
Yeah, they do. There's a huge piece of work that has to be done by CEN to review all of the European standards and make sure that they do cover the essential requirements of the GAR. Currently, all these standards are harmonised under the GAD. And I can give you some examples where they clearly don't. So EN30, for example, doesn't currently cover the risk reduction technique for gas cookers. So it allows you to put either a safety device or a label on a gas cooker lid. That clearly is against the essential requirements of the GAR. How that works progressing, I don't know. You'd have to ask CEN. There are 110 standards at the last count that have to be amended by committees of worthy volunteers, so it's a big ask. It's unlikely to be finished by the 21st of April 2018. That's what I do know. So notified bodies are going to have to think on their feet, and we're quite comfortable with that.
Thanks a lot, Graham. Next question is, as a manufacturer, we make certain products outside the EU. Are we therefore a manufacturer or an importer of those products? And I'm going to put this one over to Greg.
All right, thanks. Yeah, good question. I think the key is that you're the manufacturer. We shouldn't confuse manufacturer and manufacturing location. So if you're within the EU, you're designing these products and then you're having them manufactured in a factory in the Far East, for example, you're still the manufacturer of these products. It's not being designed and manufactured by a factory and then you're importing it and selling it. From it, if I understand the question correctly, you're the manufacturer with a factory in the Far East.
Thanks a lot, Greg. This one we'll put over to Graham, on which is, can a manufacturer apply the assessment themselves, or is a notified body actually necessary?
A notified body is necessary for both stages of the process. So there's no self-certification angle here at all.
Okay, so another question is, what is the reason for certificate validity of 3 years versus 6 or 10 years? And I'll put this over to Graham.
Yeah, that's just commercial need. I mean, the law places a maximum of 10 years validity, but because we have a responsibility to ensure over that full 10 years that you comply with the state of the art, there's a financial cost associated with that. Clearly, not everybody wants 10 years, so it makes more sense to offer them shorter periods as well. We settled on just offering 3. So 3, 6 or 10 years is the commercial offering that BSI has. Other notified bodies might see it differently. They might see 1 year is useful or 7 years. That's up to them. As long as they don't exceed 10, that's fine. And that's just the model we've chosen.
Okay, we're just going to take a couple more questions then. And one of them is, we're talking mostly about mobile devices and cooking, but what about gas boilers and gas water heaters? And are there related issues to this kind of appliance? They change a lot. Graham?
The reason we've talked about mobile appliances and things like that is because actually most of the issue with risk assessment and foreseeable use is affecting those types of products. There's actually not been a huge issue recently with things like boilers or water heaters, but clearly boilers and water heaters are covered by the regulations. All of that we talk about applies to them, but actually I'm not seeing that as being a major challenge. I think boilers and water heaters shouldn't be that difficult to get through this. Some of the products that have more user interaction, the cooking products, the mobile products, the foreseeable use is much more difficult to solve for those products. A boiler, really, what can you do? It's on or it's off. There's not many things that many ways the user can interact with it, and that's where the big challenge with the GAR is going to come.
Okay, thanks a lot, Graham. And I think this is going to be our last question before we have to wrap it up. And it is, as a manufacturer of PCBs, are these under the GAR GAD scope? And I'll put this one over to Greg.
Thanks, Rob. I think the question needs a bit more qualification, but if anyone wants to talk specifically about their products, then we can of course do that, and feel free to contact us. If we take PCBs in this aspect as being a burner control, it's a control and safety devices, it controls the release of gas flow, then yes, it would be included as a fitting under the GAD or the GAR. And fittings are required to be certified in the same way of appliances.
Okay, thanks a lot, Greg. So with that, I'm going to start wrapping up today's session. And with that, I'd now like to thank the panel today, Graham, Greg, and of course you, the audience, for joining us today. We really hope you've enjoyed the webinar. So that's it. Thanks again, and we hope you have a smooth transition to the new GAR.